program for better management of Lagos State's records for planning, policy process, enhanced service delivery, and heritage preservation. For more information on LASRAB, you can go to our website, lasrab.lagostate.gov.ng. So on this program, I have as my co-moderator, Dr. Kolawole Oseni from LASRAB, who is going to tell us a little bit more about Prof. Olukoju. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. My job here is simple and direct, and they want to read briefly the profile of Professor Ayodeji Olukoju. Olukoju was appointed Professor of History 1998 and Distinguished Professor 2018 at the University of Lagos, Nigeria. Fellow of the Nigerian Academy of Letters, Visiting Research Fellow of the Japan Foundation, the British Academy, Institute of Developing Economics, Tokyo, Chapman Foundation, Leventis Foundation, UK, and DAG, Germany, and Wara Grantee of Emory University. He served on the editorial board of Journals of African History, African Economic History, African Samani, and History in Africa, and was the first African on the executive committee of the International Maritime History Association between 2008 and 2012. Author of the Liverpool of West African Roundtable in International Journal of Maritime History, 2006. Culture and Custom of Liberia, Infrastructure Development and Urban Facility in Lagos, the 14th Commissioner of Work, book chapter and scholarly journal articles. Olukoju was Vice Chancellor, Caleb University, Imota, Lagos, between 2010 and 2016. A consultant to UNESCO, Ford Foundation, the Nigerian National Merit Award Commission, European Research Council, WATRO, Netherlands Foundation for Tropical Research, and Israel Science Foundation. Distinguished Professor Olukoju is Pro-Chancellor and Chairman Council, Christland University, Abeokuta. It's a very long list. For the sake of this program, I would like to stop and let us share our professor for all these great outfits. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. And as you said, the doctor, we have a very distinguished guest in our midst, and I know he's going to do justice to the topic today. We are very excited because this is an opportunity for us to really dig deep into understanding Lagos, what Lagos State's importance is as a global, as an economic hub, and also to learn about how historic events shaped the development of Lagos State. So without further ado, I'm going to start by asking Dr. Olukoju, I'm welcoming you to this session, and to ask you, can we know more about you, Prof? Can we know the man, Prof. Olukoju?
Good morning, my fellow panelists. I hope you can hear me well.
Very well, sir. Okay,
ma'am. It's a privilege being here this morning. I want to thank LASRAB for the opportunity. I also wish to say that I'm more or less a member of the LASRAB family. I've been through the process of the development of LASRAB since the days of Dr. Uthman, and of course your predecessor, ma'am. So I want to welcome you, our new DG, to LASRAB, if you give me that privilege.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am. So having said that, I want to say that please permit me to pause and reflect on the reality that we face right now. In the last 48 hours, we've lost in this state a senator of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. We've lost the wife of a very prominent Lagos-based pastor. And just a few minutes before I came on, I got the devastating news that one of my colleagues in my department, one of my former PhD supervisees, actually passed on in the United States yesterday. I'll be buried today.
Wow, I'm very sorry.
These are not the most exciting times, but we see life is for the living, and we have to go ahead and carry on with the business of the day. So having said that, I would say that Dr. Oseni has said what you ought to have known and what you wish to have known about me. But just to add the bow details, I am the second child and the first son of my parents. My parents were, because they passed on now, my parents were teachers. My father was Honorable Israel Adeni Olukoju, a member of parliament in the Western region between 1960 and 1965. He was a teacher. My mother too, but that is Princess Adefolawe Esther Olukoju ni Odole, was a teacher, but then she changed her career because her father insisted on her embarking on a career outside of teaching. My grandfather didn't believe that teaching was a career, so she had to go into some other thing, as a dressmaker. So I was brought up in a home where education was highly valued. I started schooling at age 5, which was quite uncommon in those days, because in those days you had to cross your arm over your head.
Yes.
Precisely like that. And I left secondary school in 1969, primary school in 1969 in my hometown. I spent a year in my mother's hometown of Idoani. That was 1966. Then from 70 to 74, I attended the secondary school in my hometown, one of the secondary schools in my hometown, African Church Grammar School of Kakoko in Ondo State. Passed now to the Division 1 result. I taught for 3 years and then went to the University of Nigeria. I was admitted into the Department of History and Archaeology. That department was the first history department in Nigeria to be hybridized. That is, to bear 2 names at the same time. So in 1980, I graduated from Nsukka. I was the best student in my faculty, a faculty that produced 2 first-class honors graduates in that year. Then, of course, after NYC, I went to UI for my master's, 82. And in 84, I went to Ogun State University, where I taught for 3 years before coming over to the University of Lagos in 1987. I didn't obtain my PhD until 1991. And then, as they say, the rest is history. In that same year, in 1991, I had the PhD. I was promoted senior lecturer. I was confirmed as a staff of UNILAG. And as you know, I've spent the rest of my life, up to this time, at the University of Lagos. So I put in 32 years here out of 36 years of my service as a university teacher. So I've devoted the better part of my life to research. I've been a user of the archives at Ibadan since 1979. And I've been to Kaduna, I've been to the Public Record Office in the UK, and I've used other repositories. For example, I've used the Guildhall Library in London and the Liverpool Public Library. So all my life, more or less since 1979, when I started using the archives, I've been an archive-based researcher. Of course, because of my interest in contemporary events, such as contemporary issues of waste management in Lagos and all that, I've had to make use of other sources, such as newspapers. And for my PhD, I consulted colonial era newspapers in Lagos, Nigerian Pioneer, Lagos Weekly Record, Lagos Daily News, and the like. So in a nutshell, I can say that I was born to be a historian because my grandparents taught me the history of my family, and they interested me in history to the point that by the time I got to secondary school and I encountered a life-changing teacher, Michael Ojofajibagbe, an indigene of Ikoro Ekiti, I decided to study history the rest of my life, and that's where we are today.
Thank you so much, Prof. It's a very, very distinguished career. I think I should be calling you Prince Professor Olukoju.
Thank you, ma'am.
Since you are obviously from a royal family, we're very happy to have you.
Thank you,
and you mentioned, thank you, sir. You mentioned that you have been using, that you actually answered my next question, which was what informed your choice of career? Because a lot of young people today, it's not very popular for people to say that they want to go and learn history. So it's very interesting that you're explaining to us why you decided to choose that profession. So I'm going to go a step further, sir, and ask you, what is your view about old Lagos life? We always talk about how, in the past, Lagos was a wonderful place. We have our parents talking very, wistfully about a beautiful time in history when Lagos was a wonderful place. So what is your view about old Lagos life in juxtaposition with the contemporary Lagos state that we all know about and are experiencing now?
Well, in 2017, I delivered a keynote at the Lagos Studies Association conference. That paper, the lecture was entitled, "Which Lagos? Whose History?" And that posed a very critical question. If you're talking about Lagos, you just mentioned old Lagos. Which old Lagos are you talking about? Old Lagos of 19th century? Old Lagos of 1910s, 1920s, 1930s? Which old Lagos are we talking about? Colonial Lagos or pre-colonial Lagos? So I want us to think, I want to assume that you meant colonial Lagos, that is Lagos between 1861 and 1960, a Lagos which experienced a massive transformation. And let me just mention what transpired. Lagos was originally, if you like, a fishing port, very small location. But over time, because of migrations, because of the intrusion of the Edo, the Benin conquered Lagos and occupied it for some time, because of the abolition of the slave trade, because of the arrival of European missionaries, because of the return of Africans who had been taken across the Atlantic to Brazil, and of course, those who came via Sierra Leone, the population of Lagos swelled. One important point we want to stress is that Lagos is what it is today because of its location, apart from the other considerations I just mentioned. But for the fact that Lagos has a port, the deepest port, with the deepest entrance on the Nigerian coastline, perhaps the history of Lagos will have been different. Otherwise, Badagry should have upstaged Lagos. But Badagry does not have, or never had, what Lagos had: a harbor entrance that was deep enough to accommodate ocean-going vessels. Of course, until 1914, ships didn't even enter Lagos itself. The bar at the mouth of the harbor had to be removed, and that was not done until 1914. So when we're talking of old Lagos, we are talking of Lagos centered on the island, not on the mainland, where I'm talking, where we are now. Both of those of you at Mangodo and those of us at Akoka. So Lagos was a tiny place, but then the presence of the British and the fact that Lagos was the harbor of trade made all the difference. Here was where we had the first elements of what we call civilization, quote and unquote. Electricity supply, water supply, tarmac roads, health facilities, primary and secondary schools, and all that. So Lagos was a compact settlement. It wasn't, if you talk of the European settlement at Ikoyi, compared, for example, to the island, Lagos the European Lagos was well planned. The indigenous part of Lagos was, as it is now, not so well planned. And the population density was skewed in favor of the indigenous place of Lagos on Lagos Island. But if you look at the place along the Marina was the center of Lagos because that was where the commercial enterprises were located. And it was not too far away from where the colonial officials had their offices, the Supreme Court and all that. So if you talk of Lagos at that time, Lagos was well organized. We need to understand that right from 1861, when Lagos was made a colony, Lagos was ruled as if it were a territory somewhere in England itself. In other words, the citizens of Lagos were different from those in the hinterland. Those in the hinterland were in the protectorate. The citizens of Lagos were citizens of the colony. And therefore, to a large extent, they enjoyed the privileges of British citizens. They had access to, for example, the judicial system. They had access to redress. They had access to the press. They had access to the beginnings of Western education. So Lagos was at that time a compact place. Traffic was, because the first vehicles ran on Lagos Road anyway, and the vehicles were not many. The roads were not quite as expensive as they are now, but at least at that time, Lagos was the center of Nigeria in terms of modernity, in terms of what we call civilization. Yoruba people will call that Olaju. So Lagos was the center of Olaju, not only for Western Nigeria, Yoruba land, but for the entirety of Nigeria. Lagos was where, if you like, Nigeria took off from. We are talking of the Nigerian nation. We cannot talk of the Nigerian nation without acknowledging the role of Lagos, the central place of Lagos in the evolution of modern Nigeria.
Thank you, sir. I really like what you said about when you are talking about Lagos, there are different periods, you know, you mentioned the pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial. I'm going to put that aside for a second and actually talk a little bit about what you said about how Lagos's location was it played a big role in how Lagos developed. Recently, I visited Singapore, and we're talking about how, you know, one of the things that helped Singapore is that it's a major hub for ships. You know, and you mentioned earlier that one of the things that helped Lagos and made it very strategic was the ports and the fact that we had a harbor entrance. And I know when we're discussing about this segment before, you mentioned how Lagos was characterized in the past as the Liverpool of Africa. Can you please shed some light on this?
Okay.
Liverpool of West Africa, sorry.
Yes. Before I refer to Lagos as Liverpool of West Africa, I want to say that I truly envy you because I haven't been to Singapore myself. I was in Malaysia in 2002, and I overlooked the pass. You know the Strait of Malacca separating Malaysia from Singapore. So I could see Indonesia and other places there, but I never really got to Singapore. So like Singapore, Lagos has taken advantage of its unique location. Those who have studied port geography will tell you that the African coastline, running anywhere from Morocco to South Africa, has a particular characteristic. That coastline lacks what we call natural indentation. Natural indentation is a gap in the coastline where you have a natural harbor. So it's only at Lagos and at Freetown on the West African coast, that we talk of Gulf of Guinea, that will have natural harbors. So Lagos has been, and Lagos has continued to enjoy that advantage that unlike what we call artificial ports, Lagos was a natural harbor. For example, if you compare Lagos to Port Harcourt in Nigeria, Port Harcourt was created from scratch. There was no port there. And therefore, it could not compete with a place that God himself had created. So it is that natural advantage of Lagos, number one, that has placed it in this position. Number two, and this is very important, the presence of the British, because the presence of the British centered all activities, political, economic, and administrative in one place. The presence of the British in Lagos actually made Lagos to have a head start compared to other parts of Nigeria. And you can see that the first rail line that went into the hinterland started from Lagos, not from another place. So that gave Lagos an advantage. And the third thing we need to note is that Lagos was linked to a very rich hinterland. Talk of Yoruba land. By road, by water, Lagos was able to capture the trade of Yoruba land. Talk of northern Nigeria, Kano. Lagos was able to capture the trade of places like Kano by rail links. So Lagos has been able to harvest a conglomeration, a confluence of advantages, such that by 1880, European writers in West Africa or in Europe nicknamed Lagos the Liverpool of West Africa because it was to Nigeria, in fact to West Africa, what Liverpool was to Britain, at least up to the 1950s or even up to the 1970s of the last century.
That's very nice, sir. I was just wondering, sir, could you please let's try and see if your video can if we can put on your video, because some of our participants want to see your face. Let's see if it will work. Thank you, sir.
So
thank you for that, sir. And you mentioned, you know,
this is the book. The Liverpool of West Africa.
Okay, this is the book.
Yes.
Okay, wow, the Liverpool of West Africa. Thank you, sir. And to our participants, if you have any interest in getting the books, we'll post something on our social media with links that you can click on to order the books. Because I believe I'm made to believe that you can actually order them online.
Amazon.
And so, Prof, I want to talk a little bit more about the ports. You know, before we go on to other questions, I want to talk a little bit more about Lagos's location. I know recently my team and I we visited Ejiri.
Yes.
Recently. And we were, you know, we understood that, you know, actually in not too distant past, Ejiri was a big contender for the status that Lagos is enjoying now. So can you talk a little bit about that as well and say, okay, how did Lagos City win out over Ejiri and other competing ports?
Well, we are probably familiar with the popular Yoruba song, Boko Kan Ejiri, Egbegberun Alo. That was a tribute to the fact that Ejiri Port was a beehive of activities. But Ejiri Port did not have two advantages that Lagos had. Do I switch off my video so I can get it right? Are you all right with my video on?
No, we can hear you, sir. You can continue.
Okay, so Lagos had two advantages over Ejiri. Number one, as I mentioned, the fact of the presence of not just the British, but a large population of returnees from Brazil and from the New World.
Oh, sorry, sir. Please, sir. Sorry. Sorry, sir. Maybe you need to put off your video, sir. We can't hear you again. Sorry, sir.
No problem. So I was making the point. I was making the point that Lagos had two advantages, at least two advantages that Ejiri lacked. The first, and for me, a critical point was that unlike Ejiri, Lagos had the presence of the British, the presence of the returnees. And if you talk of the returnees, those people came with a lot of skills. They came with a lot of human and social capital because they brought skills. Those from Sierra Leone, for example, were our pioneer medical doctors, lawyers, journalists. Those from Brazil came with skills in terms of building, construction, which Ejiri never had. Then if you look at in port geography, we mentioned something called the draft, D-R-A-U-G-H-T. The draft is the depth of water at the entrance of a port. Compared to Lagos, Ejiri could not compete at all. So that was one disadvantage that Ejiri had. In other words, Ejiri all its life was a lagoon port. Lagos was a lagoon port that graduated to a seaport, and therefore there was no basis for any form of competition. And as I mentioned earlier on, there was no way Ejiri could have lasted beyond the early years of the 20th century because it did not have railway links. The railway link was one advantage that Lagos had over other Nigerian ports. And it's unfortunate that trade normally follows where you have port access. So trade drifted to Lagos from Ejiri, from Badagry. So Lagos invariably captured the trade of other ports because in port geography, you have the concept of inter-port competition. Ports normally will compete. Ports along the same coastline, ports even across different coastlines will compete if there are cargoes competing for places of access to the hinterland. So Lagos had a lot of advantages, human, political, commercial, natural advantages, which Ejiri could not cope with. So Ejiri then became a feeder to Lagos. And over time, Ejiri, of course, went into abeyance because it was bypassed by road development, rail development, and other.
I believe
other
Prof's line.
So can you hear me now?
Hello, can you hear us, Prof?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. So if you want me to repeat what I just said now.
Hello?
Hello, I can hear you.
Hello, can you hear us, Prof?
I can hear you quite all right, but can you hear me?
Okay, you can hear him. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so yeah. Wale Awa said he can hear me. Wale, how are you doing today? So I was making the point that in terms of interport competition, I've written a paper on Lagos and the Niger ports, Lagos and when you talk of Burutu, Forcados compared to Lagos. I've done a paper on that because you need to compare what one port has that others don't have. It is what you don't have that gives you an edge. For example, if you have hinterland links, road transport, rail transport, water transport, and other ports don't have such things, then of course you are at a disadvantage. If a particular port has advantage of political power, in other words, it is the capital city of a country, political power will force trade and force other resources to that preferred port. And we also have a policy where we have what you call concentration and diffusion. Concentration means that ports in a country are reduced from, let's say, 3 or 4 or 5 to only one outlet. During the Nigerian Civil War, for example, Lagos was the only port. That was concentration. But whenever you had prosperity, where there was a boom, if, for example, you had oil boom or produce export boom, other ports will spring up. That's what we call diffusion. So Lagos has been, at the receiving end, has been a beneficiary of the process of port concentration throughout Nigerian history, particularly whenever we had economic or political crisis. During the Civil War, all roads all ports were, all exports were focused on Lagos. In terms of boom, other ports opened up. But whenever there was a problem, like during the Great Depression, the trade will shrink and everything will now focus on a single port. So that's how Lagos has upstaged a journey for Cardos, Barrow, and even Port Harcourt itself.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Sorry, I had to reconnect myself, but I got the tail end of what you said. And I'm going to just, continue on that line. People always say, and I know you kind of alluded to that earlier when you said there's this ongoing, argument or discourse, or call it what you will, where people talk about, people call Lagos a no man's land. And they say that Lagos is for everybody. So I wanted to kind of, I know it's very
it's
provocative. It's very provocative.
Yes.
So I want to ask you, sir, who were the major players in the early industrial revolution of Lagos? Because there must have been some people that were there that really helped to shape Lagos into becoming what it is today and that what everybody's enjoying today.
Well, let me just clarify a minor point there. And that is that when you talk of industrialization in Lagos was, to all intents and purposes, a post-Second World War phenomenon. So in that sense, I would just say that we should rather look at Lagos as the premier maritime and commercial hub in West Africa. It also, after 1945, of course, the industries were established. But before 1945, there were practically no industries in Lagos. Lagos was a center of trade. And the point, of course, is that as a center of trade, there were entrepreneurs. There were local entrepreneurs in Lagos. That is indigenous Lagosians who were entrepreneurs. There were entrepreneurs who brought their skills from Sierra Leone, from Brazil, as I mentioned. And therefore, if you look at the late 19th century, if you look at it from, say, the 1880s to 1900, if you look at it up to 1914, this was a period that Professor A.G. Hopkins, I'm sure you have heard about A.G. Hopkins, the author of the Economic History of South Africa. Hopkins has done a considerable study of entrepreneurship in Lagos. And he was able to demonstrate that there were different classes of entrepreneurs among the indigenous people. For example, there was a man known as Brahma Igbo. Brahma Igbo was the Babalobi, that is the man that was the leading importer of kola nut from Ghana, or what it was called the Gold Coast at that time. The Gold Coast was an exporter of kola nut to Nigeria. And this man, this Brahma Igbo, of an indigenous Lagosian, was a major player in that field. Many of the traders, that is the indigenous Lagosians, whether they were Saro or whether they were of Brazilian origin, whether they were indigenous Lagosians, of course, you need to understand that Lagos has evolved over time. We had indigenous Lagosians like the Awori, like the even like the Jebu and the Egba around Butemeta. But you also had this, because we have had layers of people in Lagos, the indigenous people, the Benin people that came, you had the Nupe people that came as well, you had the Hausa people that came, and of course you had these people from the diaspora. And of course, as you know, during the 20th century, we also have people that came in from the Yoruba hinterland, from Eastern Nigeria and other parts of Nigeria. So essentially, up to the time, that is my major interest was the colonial period. The colonial period witnessed entrepreneurship in Lagos, entrepreneurship by indigenous Lagosians, by returning Lagosians, and also expatriate businessmen. The expatriate businessmen comprise two groups. Number one, the Levantines, that is to say the Syrians and the Lebanese. Then you had the Europeans. Europeans, of course, also include the Americans. So Lagos was a cosmopolitan center where you had different types of entrepreneurs. And at that time, because of access to capital, the expatriates controlled the trade because they had access to capital from their home country. And therefore, there was a sort of classification. And if you look at the terminology of Professor Hopkins, most of the indigenous traders were classified as traders because they were small-scale operators. And they were even derided as middlemen traders. Most of the expatriates, because they represented big companies, were classified as merchants. In other words, merchants, quote and unquote, represented big firms and their representatives in West Africa. Traders, quote and unquote, and they also called middlemen traders, represented indigenous traders. They were community men traders because they were the people that were able to go to the hinterland, for example, go to a place like Abeokuta or go to Ijebu-Ode to procure things from the producers. And then they brought those things by canoe on water to Lagos to sell to both, especially expatriate firms. So this, in a nutshell, was, if you like, a configuration of the commercial structure of Lagos during the colonial period.
That's very interesting, sir. So basically, it seems like there was an edge given to, like you mentioned, the expatriates, because of their, their access to capital versus the indigenous Lagosians, and this probably was promoted by colonialism.
Exactly.
But even despite the odds, we still have some indigenous Lagosians that were able to overcome these odds and were able to really build, big booming industries. So are there some that you can kind of point to that helped us to kind of develop our economy?
Well, in looking at the business history of Lagos, or what you call the history of entrepreneurship in Lagos, it is true that some of those merchants became quite prominent. If you look at someone like S.H. Pierce, you have heard of Samuel Pierce, you've heard of the Dohertys of Lagos, you've heard of the Darochas of Lagos, and you also need to know, and we need to acknowledge that there were also women involved in this. Madam Tinubu was a woman, and that woman, of course, was not a woman. And the thing about money in Lagos, if you talk of someone like D.C. Taiwo Olowo, was that these people were rich, not just in terms of trade, but also in terms of property. One of the consequences of the British colonialism of Lagos was the commercialization of land. Land now had value more than it had before. And people could now practically alienate land because they could have access to land by purchase or by lease. And some of these people became big money lenders. They raised capital through trade and other activities, and then they became money lenders. So if you look at all those people, we had them in Lagos. And if you go around the city of Lagos, I'm talking of the island now, you see the vestiges, the palatial buildings that they had. Look at Elephant House and all that, Water House. So these people became quite enterprising. The only regret I have, which is what made it became quite inevitable, was that many of them did not survive the colonial period. We've had a problem of succession. Many of those businesses did not go beyond the first generation to second generation. I've studied, for example, a man known as William Akinola Daudu. William Akinola Daudu was a pioneer in the area of motor transport, not just in terms of running the transport service, but in terms of it was a retailer because he was importing those vehicles from America. He was also what you might call a mechanical engineer. He actually went to school. He acquired mechanical skills. He had a showroom in Lagos. He had establishments as far as in Oshogbo, in Western Nigeria, and up to all the way to Kano. The colonial government even patronized him because they needed his trucks and his facilities to conduct business. So we had them in different aspects in produce trade, in money lending, even in the area of real estate. So we had quite a large number of them. And anybody reading through the history of Lagos will marvel at how much these people acquired. In one of the papers I wrote in recent times, I wrote a paper that was critical of that class of entrepreneurs. The paper was entitled Accumulation and Conspicuous Consumption. Many of them invested their money in building palatial homes, in buying expensive cars, and some of them even had their laundry done in Liverpool and brought to Lagos. In 1987, I went to Ikoyi Cemetery. Yes, you are surprised. Yes, I went to Ikoyi Cemetery, and on the tombstone, in fact, if anybody wants to write what I might call a social history of Lagos, you should go to Ikoyi Cemetery and look at what people wrote about their ancestors there. Some of those ancestors, if you look at the quality of their tombstones, some of those things were imported. In fact, they were imported. So it was, some of them actually traveled. In those days, it was by sea. They traveled to the UK on business trips, even for pleasure. So there was opulence in Lagos, but unfortunately, they were not as entrepreneurial, for example, as the Lebanese or the Syrians, or even some of the expatriates here who saved the money for the rainy day and invested in the business and handed over the business to their children and, of course, their grandchildren, as the case may be. So the problem of business succession, the problem of the survival of the enterprise is one thing that we see in looking at the history of commerce in Lagos.
Thank you, sir. That's very interesting, and you brought out a lot of things that I really want to kind of pick at. But I know there's some people that have questions, so I'm going to ask you maybe a few more before we now open up the floor. In the meantime, sir, can you?
Hello. I can't hear you.
Hello, sir. I think
can we... Okay, I'm back.
She's back.
I'm back. Thank you. Can we please try your video, sir, to see if it will work?
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
A lot of people are requesting to see your face.
I wish you had seen me yesterday.
Sorry?
Because I shaved for the first time in 3 months yesterday.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You look very good, sir.
Thank you very much, man.
So you mentioned, sir, that we had some local industrialists. You mentioned SHPS, Doherty, Daroshas, Madam Tinumbu. And I'm sure people like maybe Madam Ipele Wura or even Madam Abari, are they among those women? Because we hear about women, but I don't think we talk a lot about the powerful women that were very, very successful in the past and that helped Lagos to develop to where it is now.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, one name that has loomed large in the commercial history of Lagos was Madam Tinubu. Let's use that woman as a point of entry into the role of gender and business in Lagos. As far as I can determine from the records, these women none of them, apart from Madam Tinubu, ever attained the level of capital accumulation of the men. And that could be ascribed to culture. Someone like Madam Tinubu was able to acquire wealth because of her strategic marital relations. That is, you have to marry well, marry into wealth. You could acquire wealth because of access to your husband's property. You could acquire wealth by virtue of inheritance. If you look at the very popular case, 1912 case, Louis and Bankole, a very popular case in Lagos. It was a case that was decided, and that case was unique to Lagos, that is compared to the rest of Yorubaland, where the question was raised as to whether female children or female descendants will inherit property in their paternal family. And the court ruled in favor of female inheritance in Lagos. I'm not quite sure that was privileged to other parts of Yorubaland, but the Lagos example, that court case, Louis versus Bankole 1912, is a standard case in Nigerian jurisprudence. And that tells you that women in Lagos, well, generally, they dominated the local enterprise, they dominated the markets. That's why you have all this Yaloja. You mentioned Alimotu Pelewura. But you cannot compare Alimotu Pelewura, for example, to the kind of to Tinubu in terms of wealth, because Tinubu's wealth was not just necessarily in terms of trade, it was because of property, access to wealth. You could compare Tinubu to a man like DC Taiwo. There, that is Daniel Conrad Taiwo Lowo, because Taiwo's wealth was based on money lending and on property, because wealth in Lagos was not just in terms of trade, but also in terms of property. And that was what made Lagos quite unique in Nigeria, if not the whole of West Africa at the time. So it is true, there were women, but compared to their number, because women were usually more than men, compared to the number of men that became prominent, women, I would tend to suggest, played only a minor role. They played a minor role only in local markets, as far as I can tell, because none of them attained the standards of the Darochas of this world, the Pierces of this world, the S.A. Thomases of this world, and so on and so forth.
Thank you, sir. And when we started the conversation, we talked about Singapore and how, there are some parallels between Lagos and Singapore. And one of the things that Lee Kuan Yew said when they asked him, what were the things that you did to make Singapore really successful? He said that they had to go back and rewrite all their laws to ensure that women had equal rights. So it seems that was a thing that maybe Lagos was unable to do, but we did a little bit of, and it has really paid off for people like Madam Tinubu.
Well, you see, in terms of women empowerment, I also want us to understand that women empowerment could be pursued through different channels. One was business or trade, the other was the professions. So the question would then be, if women had access to local markets, they dominated the markets, they were part of the chain, the chain of what you call middlemen trade. What about women in the professions? How many of them were lawyers? How many of them were medical doctors? How many of them edited newspapers? The only exception I will see, and quite a few of them actually, was Obasa. That is the daughter of R.B. Blaze, the woman that blazed the trail in terms of municipal motor transport in Lagos, the proprietress of Anfani bus service. So, but you could see that that woman was able to make it because she had a privileged background. So if you want to look at women who were successful in Lagos, beyond trade, we also need to look at the professions. But then you have to go back to who their fathers were and who they married. And that's why someone like Professor Christy Mann wrote the book on marrying well, because marriage was also a strategy of social mobility in Lagos, particularly for women.
I love that, sir. So it's a strategy that we all, hopefully women are taking into consideration.
Yes, yes, I made the point that marriage was also a strategy of empowerment for women. That in other words, you were either a daughter of a rich man or you got married to a rich family. And through your father, you inherited, through your husband, you also inherited, and so on and so forth. But then in terms of success in the professions, law, journalism, medicine, women did not quite make it as much as the men did in colonial Lagos. But I think that the situation has changed now, because I'm looking at one of those successful women, Lagos women on this program.
There are many of them, sir. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to open up for some questions, because in fact, the comments that we've been getting on the chats have been so interesting. So just not in any order, I'm just going to pick a question that somebody mentioned. They said, can you, let me ask about, they said, Prof, from BARA, Prof, this discussion is very interesting. Going through the history of Lagos and by evaluating the riches of the history, as sole administrator of Lagos Island local government, I renamed streets after Darosha, Orlando Martins, Wahab Dosemu to immortalize their names. They contributed a lot. So that was a comment from BARA.
Sorry, can I comment on that comment?
Yes, please, sir.
Yes, I think that one thing that we in Lagos should guard against is the erasure of history. We must not erase history. I'm happy that the distinguished chairman, because sole administrator is chairman, is the same thing. The distinguished sole administrator did a very good thing. He did a great service, because people will ask questions. Why did you name this street after Wahab Dosemu? I worked with Dr. Wahab Dosemu as a member of the Public Council of the NIIA, a very distinguished Nigerian, a senator of the Federal Republic, a minister, and a learned man. I mean, a doctor, a PhD man. So it is good to name streets after, and not just streets now, monuments after people. But we should not name monuments after people because of the money, because of, this richest man now. No, what did he or she contribute to Lagos? And I also think that in naming those monuments, we should also be gender sensitive, because women may not be as recognized as men, but whoever that woman is, any notable woman should also be remembered in Lagos. We need to have more of them beyond Tinubu, and of course it's good to remember Alimoto Kwilewura and others like that, and of course the Aloja herself. So as many women as we can celebrate. I think we should do that. In other words, I'm making a case for gender balance in naming monuments after people. But I want to thank the sole administrator for doing that.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for that. I really agree with you that it's very important for us to remember these people. And it's not only about their monetary achievements. Like you said, they may have contributed other things that we cannot even quantify. I think before we go a little bit, I don't know, because I don't want to open a hornet's nest. So I'm very careful of the question that I ask, so that we don't overshoot the time too much, because there are so many questions that we can ask. But I know that if I ask the wrong question, we can spend the rest of the day here trying to, trying to do justice. But I think a question I just want us to really touch on is, how would you place the commercial and industrial activities of Lagos in the economic development of Nigeria and West African sub-region?
Okay. I think that we have agreed on this program, and I think history has established it, that the primacy of Lagos derived from its location, derived from the confluence of factors, settlement of people, colonial order, access to the hinterlands, transport links, because none of this should be taken in isolation. All of these elements, all of these dynamics worked together. And therefore, if you look at Lagos compared to, for example, Ghana, or let's say Tema in Ghana, or even Freetown in Sierra Leone, the question you ask yourself is, this, for example, Freetown has an advantage that Lagos also has. That is to say, a natural harbor. In fact, Freetown ordinarily should have been the Liverpool of West Africa. But then Freetown is limited in its hinterland. You can never understand the history of a port or a port city without reference to its hinterland. There must be a place behind that port, roughly speaking, that feeds the port, or that the port itself feeds. The bigger and the richer the hinterland, the greater the likelihood that that port will be great. And that's what has worked for Lagos. So Lagos has been a port of call for shipping lines right from the 18th century, even from the days of the slave trade. And particularly after 1861, Lagos became the center of trade. As I said, there was no comparable outlet along the Nigerian coastline. So all roads literally led to Lagos. And by virtue of the colonial policy of aligning ports with railway lines, Lagos already had a head start. And it was only between 1913 and 1926 that Port Harcourt came up as a possible rival to Lagos. But as you know, what was the quality of the hinterland that Port Harcourt captured? Port Harcourt was designed basically to evacuate coal from Enugu, and then of course, tin and columbite from the Jos Plateau. You can't compare those to what passed through Lagos, the whole of Western Nigeria and the central portion of Nigeria leading up to Kano. So Lagos enjoyed that advantage, the advantage of a very huge hinterland. And you also need to know that beyond Nigeria, Lagos was the outlet for places in what we now call Niger Republic and other parts of the Sahel. And because when you look at which outlet a hinterland should choose, for example, if you are living in, say, Niamey, or you are living in Jamina, you need to look at which outlet will serve your interest the best in terms of, for example, access to the port. Is it easy? Distance from the port, is it long? The efficiency of operations at the port. Those are considerations that people take in. And therefore, over a long period of time, Lagos has enjoyed a steady advantage over other ports along the coastline. So it's no surprise, if looking at it objectively, that Lagos has maintained the primacy of position along West Africa. You also need to understand, and we need to acknowledge this, that the enterprise of people living in Lagos, I'm talking of Lagosians who are Lagosians by birth, Lagosians who are Lagosians by residence, the enterprise, if you look at the population of Lagos now, Lagos along the coastline is certainly the most populous city across the entire coastline. And therefore, there's no city that's comparable in terms of population, in terms of enterprise, in terms of the concentration of capital in Lagos. Lagos, in fact, is number one. And there's no, although as we speak now, there are plans to have what we call hub ports, HUB, and Abidjan is competing with Lagos. Ghana too is thinking of something else, Togo is thinking about, none of them can compete with Lagos based on the advantage I just mentioned, but principally the huge size of the Lagos economy. Lagos is number 5 in the whole of Africa. If Lagos were to be a country, it would be ranked above and beyond many of the countries in Africa. So given that kind of, if you like, locational advantage, strategic advantage, there's no way in the foreseeable future, barring a calamity. For example, if you had ocean level rise, if Lagos was swamped by the Atlantic, it would change the equation. But as it is now, Lagos is so well positioned that at least in the next 10, 20 years, if not longer, I don't see anyone, any port or any port city superseding Lagos in the hierarchy of ports in West Africa. In fact, that is exactly the subject of our forthcoming book. We have just done a book now on African seaports, and we have looked at the Gulf of Guinea ports. my former student, Dr. Chilak, and I have looked at those ports along the coastline, and our prognosis right now is that though Abidjan is competing with Lagos, it's going to be a tough battle, and that if they were to run neck and neck as they are doing now, the deciding factor will be the preference of the mega shipping line, because the mega shipping lines will determine which port is more convenient and better positioned for them.
Wow, this is very interesting. I'm just looking at the time, and I wanted to see if anybody had any questions before I ask anymore, because I don't want to be the only one asking. So if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand so that our moderator can, technical moderator can recognize you.
Yes, and we have 2 people raising their hands. Are they free to talk?
Yes, please let them talk.
Okay.
Thank you.
BA, Mr. Are, please go ahead.
I didn't know I raised my hand, maybe by accident, but this is a very good program anyway, because there are a lot of young people right now that do not really understand what Lagos is all about, or the history of Lagos. If you go to Global Hall in Lagos Island, you go to City Hall, those are rich areas. Freedom Park on Broad Street is also another historic site. So I really appreciate whoever put this together, and I think it should be continuous. I'll reach out to Ms. Abiola later on to see how I can contribute to make this program an infinite program, so that our young people can really understand. Because if you don't know the value of what you have, you cannot preserve it. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, sir, for your kind words, and we're very grateful for that words of encouragement. We'll definitely continue, and we hope that we'll be able to have some more, series that we can use to really unlock, like you said, the rich history of Lagos. Because we've not even done, we have the wonderful Prof here, but there's so much that we can talk about that, we will spend a long time if we were to do it in one day.
I mean, the Director House should be like somewhere students should be going for excursion. It's a lot of rich history there, and it's by Kakawa Street. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll follow it up. That's one of the features of LASTRAB. LASTRAB is, like I mentioned earlier, we work with the Lagos. We are one of the agencies of Lagos State government, and we're responsible for heritage preservation in Lagos State. So that's something that I'm sure we have records of the Darusha Our House, and we can definitely work with you to, make sure that people know about it and learn more about its historical significance. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Could I come in?
Yes. Yes, sir. Please come in, sir.
A few years back, we organized a program at LASTRAB to commemorate the International Archives Day. And I think that I made a contribution that all archivists should be activists. And that is that LASTRAB in particular should do outreach to the community. And I want to make a suggestion based on what Dr. Are just said now. Is it possible for LASTRAB to convince the Lagos State government to ensure that something is inserted in the curriculum? And that is to say heritage studies, particularly of Lagos, where maybe once in a semester, once in a year, and LASTRAB could organize that with the Lagos State Arts and Culture Council to let primary school children, junior secondary and all that, go around some of these heights in Lagos so that they will know, and then they learn the history behind some of those names and some of those monuments. That's just my addition to what Dr. Are just said.
Thank you so much, Prof. Well noted, and we'll definitely work on it. Thank you so much, sir.
That's a welcome suggestion.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other question? I have more questions.
Yes,
Prof,
we have. Mrs. Dakwa Thomas would like to say something, so I'm just going to unmute her as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for this webinar. I am so glad I stumbled on it on our platform, and the minute I saw it, it was almost 11 o'clock, but I said I would also like to participate and, listen in to the history of Lagos. Our heritage is so, so very rich. I'd like to agree with Mr. Are, and I mean that on the issue of, on the matter of how to get much more involved in preserving this richness, this heritage of Lagos. Each time my children will say, where is our village? And of course, you'll not keep saying you're Lagosian, you're a Lagosian. But really and truly, the face of Lagos has changed from our time to their time. What they know of Lagos, I mean, I'm sorry, I don't live in Lekki, but they'll say, is it Lekki? Is it Ikoyi? Is it? But you see, there's much more to Lagos than Lekki and Ikoyi. And of course, just as I've said, the face of Lagos is changing. And if we are not very careful, in the next 5-10 years, we won't have anything to show of Lagos if we do not have a very active, LASRAB trying to do this preservation for us. And of course, the likes of the Prof and the doctors and all of them in history trying to do a lot of these things for us. My husband, incidentally, is also a doctor in history, has a PhD in history, though he's an American and international relations, but he tries as much as possible, being a Lagosian, also to, try to do a lot of research and keep a lot of these things for our children. But how many of us do have that opportunity? So the opportunity is with LASRAB to help us, just as the last, the archivist and the Prof or the doctor said, for us to find a way to insert this into the curriculum of our students. Lagos cannot die, because people keep saying it's cosmopolitan, it is no man's land and all of that, and in no time, the entire thing will be eroded. So I think this is my own contribution. I think we should do much more. I'm so happy to be, and of course I think this should be a program. I think a program, LASRAB, Miss Bliki, sorry. I want this to be a program so that every time one can actually tell the children, oh yeah, tune in, we're listening in, tune in to this webinar, tune in to this radio program, tune in to this TV program. So I think you've got to do much more. There's a lot more on your hands than this. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Wow, thank you so much, Ma. We're definitely going to, it's a big Herculean task, but we're definitely going to do our best. We really appreciate your contribution. And this webinar is actually going to be recorded. There are going to be a series of them, of different topics, and it's going to be based on demand. So we're going to listen to people. If there are topics that anybody wants us to really touch on, they should contact us and we'll definitely work on it. But you're absolutely right, Ma. We have a lot of work to do justice to keeping Lagos's heritage alive.
I wanted to make a to interject at this point. Can I?
Yes, please, sir.
Based on what Mrs. Dakotomos just mentioned, let me mention the fact that over the last 2 or 3 years, I've launched an initiative on my own, and that is to get my students, undergraduate students, to study Lagos history. And I asked them to look at to focus on 2 or 3 themes: a street or an area in Lagos, an institution in Lagos, or a personality in Lagos. So what I'm saying is Lagos, that is University of Lagos and LASU, the Department of History there, should encourage the undergraduate students to write a history of the street. For example, the Marina. Somebody should write a history of the Marina. Someone should write a history of Kakawa Street over a long period of time. Somebody could also take on the history of a household. Mention a particular household on Lagos Island, not of the mainland now. Go there and look at that history of the household. How did it evolve? For example, as Yoruba community say, what is the origin of these households? They should do that. The third thing I will ask my students to do, and I got my master's student to write on ignored or neglected communities in Lagos, communities that have been overtaken by the megalopolis. And that is to say, I asked the student to write on Igbo Bishabe if you're driving in from Lagos, you are approaching a campus from Yabate, from Djibo, just pass by without appreciating that there is actually an Asian community there. And my student wrote a master's program on that. So we have so many of them. When they're talking of Ojuwoye, talking of Onibongo, there should be focused studies of these communities that have been overrun by the metropolis, by the cosmopolitan aspect of Lagos. So that's my suggestion at this point.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, ma. Thank you so much, ma.
Fantastic idea. Fantastic.
Thank you, ma. Thanks for your support. Larry, do we have any more questions? I think some people have.
Yes, we have 2 more.
Please, can you go ahead? Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Lawal. Olawale, please go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
Okay, I have 2 contributions, one for our professor there. Number one, Prof, when we are talking about indigenous contribution to commercial development of Lagos, I would like you to look at the contributions of the Aguda and the contributions of the Saro to the commercial and industrial development of Lagos. Yes. That is the question I have for Prof. Then for LASRAP DG, I happen to be a member of history projects that the former Lagos State governor put up between 2012 to 2015. And I know that we have a lot of things that we deposited at LASRAP. And we went all over we went to London, Portugal, Brazil, and all of that. So I think we should look at all those things that we deposited and see how those things will improve our knowledge of Lagos. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I'll leave it to Prof to answer your question.
Well, maybe at the risk of repetition, I had mentioned the Saro and Aguda because at the initial stage of this discussion, I mentioned that we have Lagos is a community of layers, the layers of indigenous, whether you're talking of Awori or other people, and then you're talking of those who came in the 19th century, essentially the Nupe. Some of them have been there before now, but at least during the 19th century, the Nupe, and much earlier the Benin. Then, of course, the Aguda. Of course, essentially those ones came from Latin America, from Brazil in particular. And of course, the Saro that came in via Sierra Leone. I mentioned the fact, and that fact is taken as a historical fact, that when you talk of the distribution of expertise, those who came via Sierra Leone were more or less the literati, those who were the later people, the lawyers, the medical doctors, those were the pioneers. And of course, on the other side, we have the traders and the artisans who did very well as either builders. And that's why today, even though people have debated whether it is actually Brazilian, they are the people that are giving us the distinct, unique Brazilian architecture on Lagos Island. And if you have looked at the thesis of Professor Hopkins, unfortunately, if Wale Lawa wants a copy of that thesis, I'll get a copy across to you. I now have a soft copy of the thesis of Professor E.J. Hopkins, which I think LASRAP should also have. There he had a discussion. I think he ran it about 20 or 30 pages of the indigenous commercial class in Lagos, talking of the Darochas, the Brancos, and all that. So by their names, you identify them. The Brazilian names are unique and distinct, and of course, the Saro names are unique and distinct. I'm not trying to separate them because at some point they overlapped. In other words, some of those Aguda also became lawyers and doctors and all that, but they were all involved in the trade of Lagos. Unfortunately, as you know, those of them who became successful, as I mentioned earlier on, did not pass on their business enterprises to their children. Only a few of them, like the Doherty enterprise, survived into the next generation. Most of them fizzled out in the first generation. And unfortunately, by the onset of the Great Depression in 1929, many of them did not survive that. Many of them came up in the post-war boom of 1918, 1920. The First World War ended in 1918. And after that, there was a brief boom of 1918, 1920, when a lot of people entered into the produce business. Many of them acquired wealth, which of course they spent anyhow. We've written papers on that. But the thing is that by 1929, most of them had fizzled out. Only a few of them survived. Someone like S.H. Peirce, for example, if you look at what Hopkins has come up with about him, the man had fluctuating fortunes. At some point, he became bankrupt. And at some point, he refloated. At some point, he left Lagos and went to a different type of business. So we could see in these enterprises, if you look at what might call potted histories, if you look at the book, the Red Book of West Africa, put together by Alistair Macmillan, we are going to see short histories of these people. They experienced fluctuating fortunes. And you could use their lifestyle to map the whole course of Lagos history. Lagos during the First World War, Lagos in the interwar period, Lagos during the Great Depression, Lagos during the Second World War, and so on and so forth. So I concur with Dr. Lawal. Yes, we had outstanding Saro businessmen, we had outstanding Aguda businessmen, we had outstanding indigenous businessmen of Lagos origin too. But then these people played a second fiddle role to the expatriate businessmen in Lagos. It's unfortunate because ordinarily we became hewers of wood and fetchers of water in our own country, but that was the structure of the colonial economy. The colonial government supported colonial enterprise to keep indigenous enterprise down. And those of them who managed to survive were actually crushed during the Great Depression.
Thank you.
Wow. So it seems like our indigenous businessmen, they had a lot of challenges that they were set up almost to fail because despite their best efforts, there were a lot of challenges that they had to weather. Thanks for those questions. And just to respond to Dr. Lawal, thank you so much for your contributions. If anybody has any need for any information on Lagos history, we have a very rich collection of archives at LASRAM. So you can come down, it's free, and you can actually refer to our collection. We have, I think, over almost 10,000 artifacts with us that you can actually look and refer to. And we are looking for more. So if there's anybody that has anything that they want to contribute to Lagos State, please, and you feel that this is something that we should keep for the posterity, please contact us, and it will be kept very safely for other people to also enjoy.
Exactly.
Thank you. Larry, do you have any question? Any other person that has questions?
There are actually quite a few people that have more questions at the moment. I don't know how many we can take, but we have at least 4 more. So I'll just go in order of...
Okay, yes, please. Thank you.
Yes. Dapo, can't even see. Hello? Dapo, can you hear us? Dapo Olakunle.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you very much. This is Dapo Olakunle. I'm the General Manager of Lagos State Coconut Development Authority. Honestly, this... Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, sir. Well done. Welcome.
This is a wonderful program.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much. I love this. I love this. I love this. And like the Yoruba people says, that ìlú tí ò bá nítàn kò kí ń pẹ́ tán. So I appreciate what history can do, because without deep knowledge of your issue, where you are coming from, you wouldn't know where you are going. So I appreciate what LASRAM is doing, and Prof, I appreciate you. Now, in terms of history, I want to say that there are some historical facts that are embedded in agricultural sector, which I want Prof to look into this area. For example, let me give you an example of coconuts. I know coconut is synonymous with Lagos State, and if you look at our crest, we have coconut trees there. But my challenge, since the day I was appointed as the GM of coconut, why do we have that coconut? Why? Of all crops. Is it because it's plenty, you have it in the coast, or what? It's not only Lagos that you have coconut along the coast. Why interest? So these are the areas I think you should help us look into it beyond the commerce and the rest. In agricultural area, what are the historical facts that are there that is hidden that can help us to project the future? Then again, This will help us to do a lot of things. If you are pushing people to plant coconut now, they say, what is the importance? Because the issue is lost. Thank you. So that's my contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank you,
very
sir.
much, sir.
You're welcome, sir. You're welcome.
I'll leave that to Prof.
Okay.
Tackle.
Let me just say something that let me respond to that very quickly. The comment that has been raised is I think it's like telling us that we are making something. We've always thought of Lagos as a commercial center. We've somehow ignored the agricultural dimension to Lagos history, which is what he has just done now. I would say that the coconut industry in Lagos is a gift of the ecology. In other words, you wouldn't find coconut, for example, in Abeokuta or other places. So as the port is a natural gift from God to Lagos, coconut has been a natural gift to Lagos, particularly the Badagry axis. However, and this is important for us to note, it is a challenge to, I mean, I don't know what is their own commission is doing. Our challenge is not just to know how maybe the coconut was introduced to that place, how it has grown over the years. Our challenge is to raise that industry from the current level. As it is now, it is still, as far as I know, an artisanal enterprise. We should raise it from that artisanal to industrial. How are we harvesting coconut? How are we making it? What are we processing this into? In other words, if you have coconut and it has no value addition, it will remain what it is now. So the next step is to ensure that in that particular community, an effort is made to ensure that people are brought in, youth are involved in the industry, and the industry itself is mechanized or modernized to make it something that has what we call that has backward and forward linkages in the economy. And that whatever we export, we don't export just the raw thing. We export something that has value added to it, maybe coconut oil, for example. The other thing that I want to mention about in the context of Lagos history, agricultural history, that people forget that Lagos has played a key role in one aspect of Nigerian history that people forget all the time: the expansion of cocoa production in Nigeria. Agege played a key role. Agege and the African Church. Professor J.B. Wester has written articles on that. The role of Agege in extending not just African Church, the African Church brand of Christianity, but also the planting of cocoa from here all the way to Ondo, to Ibadan, to Ondo. It was Agege that was the hub of cocoa planting in Western Nigeria, and of course across Nigeria too. So that is one important contribution that Lagos has made to agricultural development in Nigeria. And if you look at a place like Agbowa, the Ricketts of Agbowa, the Ricketts family, 3 generations also were engaged in agricultural enterprise in that place. The late Professor Ade Adefoye has written on the Ricketts of Agbowa. So Lagos is often seen as a commercial city, which is true. But on the recent times, maybe until the early 20th century, Lagos was also a very, very important agricultural center in Western Nigeria. It was from here that the planting of cocoa spread across Nigeria. Just as from here, Christianity moved to the interior of Nigeria. From here, the light of or even political activities started from here. So Lagos is a many-sided blessing to Nigeria, contemporary Nigeria and future Nigeria too.
Before we take any more questions, Prof, I just want to ask you a question. You know, you had mentioned that, you know, when you look at Lagos versus other prominent West African cities, Lagos has an advantage. So I wanted to just list those advantages. You mentioned the fact that we are a deep sea port. We have the Chinese and the British. We have access to Nigerian markets. We have the railway lines that were developed by the British. We have a population. We have about 20 million people of our population. And also because Lagos State has been able to build, and this is my own contribution, Lagos State has been able to build a very strong IGR base that has allowed us to become financially sustainable. And then I want to ask you, sir, what are the other things that you think would allow Lagos to be competitive? Because now that we are in COVID, we have to think about what is going to be the future of Lagos. How can we make ourselves, you know, stronger? We can't really always rely on, like you said, God's gifts. How can we as man use that gift to push ourselves forward?
One thing that we need to add to your list. Yes, I want you please add to your list the enterprise of Lagosians. because Lagos we're talking of IGR. IGR is not based on anything other than enterprise. You can only harvest IGR from a capital base. You know, we mentioned that Lagos, the economy of Lagos is number 5 in the whole of Africa. So you are going to factor in the human capital base of Lagos. That's quite important. For the post-COVID-19 era of Lagos, one thing has become clear, and not just about Lagos, but for the entire world at this time. We are going to live in a world that is ICT driven. We are going to live in a world where people will be valued for what they can contribute from a distance. We are going to be valued for what we can do by working on the online, internet, whatever means. In other words, in as much as we're going to have factories in Lagos, businesses in Lagos, Lagos will be greater and better if we have bandwidth. I mean, over here, I'm looking at something written by somebody said, Bilkis Adebi Abiola's network bandwidth is low. That is one thing we need to tackle now. That the issue of bandwidth, the issue of internet access, the issue of mass transit in Lagos, because ultimately people have to move around. Until and unless we resolve the issue of electric trains in Lagos, running east-west in Lagos, northwest in Lagos, that is all the way from where I am now to Agege and so on and so forth. So those are the two critical things that we're going to look at in Lagos. The first thing, of course, the ICT infrastructure of Lagos. The second thing is electric-based mass transit system in Lagos. The third thing would then be security of life and property in Lagos. And of course, the other thing that we need to do is to look at our water transport. Our water transport in the context of intermodalism. In other words, if you are traveling across the coastline of Lagos, at some point you should be in a position to hop on any means of transportation. Could be road transport, could be rail transport, or another means of transport, or even air transport. So I believe that in the post-COVID-19 era of Lagos, as I mentioned, our ICT we have to do something about it. Our power supply, we have to do something about it, and that's very urgent. Mass transit, we have to do something about it. Water transport, we have to do something about it. And the coordination of all these elements, we have to do something about it. The last thing we need to think about is what Lagos is doing now, and that is to harvest tax. People must pay tax in Lagos, and people must see what the tax revenues are used for.
Wow, this is very, very powerful. And I'm very happy that our governor has his PIMS agenda actually aligns very well with what you have outlined. So I know that we in Lagos, we are going to have a lot to look forward to. Larry, do we have any more questions?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, Mr. Olakunle, I think you also wanted to ask more questions, but I don't think he's been able to. Mr. Olakunle, maybe you can unmute yourself. Okay, maybe move on to the next question. Tajuddin also wants to ask a question.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello?
Hello, Mr. Tajuddin. Good afternoon.
Yes.
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, all right. Yes, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for organizing this webinar. I was a student of Professor Olukoju, so we must thank you for this very great lecture. Well, Prof, sir, I will be speaking. I want to ask a question on behalf of the indigenous of Lagos. Now, Lagos can't stop people from coming in. And that's why today we have over 20 million people in Lagos. And so the original Lagosians today are now like minority. And so this incidents plays out during elections where you find Lagosians struggling to contest for positions, and that's because of the overwhelming nature of people from countryside and then every other part of Nigeria. Sir, is there a way a legislation can be passed to protect original Lagosians, to protect their interests in the stake of what happens in Lagos? Because, sir, I feel that with the growing trends, if nothing is done, in the next 10, 15 years, the original Lagosians might be eroded from the scheme of things in Lagos. Thank you, sir.
Well, Tajuddin, you are putting me on the spot now. And you are saying this because you know that I'm actually a non-Lagosian by birth. Well, Madam DG, if we are to tackle this question, we have to be very objective, and we have to be we have to avoid being politically correct. The
Okay,
first question
sir.
that has to be asked, which I think Taji himself should answer for me, is who are these indigenous Lagosians and who's a Lagosian? I think that Taji should go back and read that lecture I gave, which Lagos history. Actually, it's published. It's online. You can go and read it now. It's published in Lagos News and Records. And that tackles the issue of who a Lagosian is. I understand where he's coming from, and if you listen to that lecture, if you read it, you will know actually sympathetic towards those that could be classified as indigenous Lagosians, as opposed to those who are Lagos residents. By way of a digression, I mentioned it during the lecture that I had 2 of my children in Lagos here. Two of my 4 children were born in Lagos, but I registered them as indigenous of my state, because even from that point in time, I'm talking of 1995 now, I'd always felt that those are called indigenous Lagosians, that is, those of them who have no other homes outside of Lagos. We have to be very frank in tackling this. There are people, if there were to be a crisis in Lagos, who have no other place to go to, perhaps except perhaps their mothers are from Abeokuta and other places. I personally can move into my residence somewhere outside Lagos and occupy the place in the next 5-7 hours. But I know of Lagosians who have never left Lagos, who have no links outside Lagos. So I appreciate the fact that something has to be done to safeguard the interest. I've made a recommendation, a very controversial recommendation, in terms of affirmative action for Lagosians. And that I said is this. And I said that some offices in Lagos, I'm not saying this because this is the popular thing to say. I'm saying this because this is what I believe. This is what I've put in writing. I've written it on paper. So it's not a question of saying it because I want anybody to clap. I believe that we need to have a policy of affirmative action to safeguard the interests of such people. I just mentioned in the course of this discussion that there is a tiny community just outside of the gate of Yabatek, Igbo-Bishabe. We have so many of such places in Lagos where people don't have any other home. That has been their ancestral home. Their parents and grandparents were buried there and so on and so forth. I'm saying that some offices in Lagos should be exclusively reserved for such people. And that is to say, they can do it by rotation. We have only 3 central districts in Lagos. The people that are indigenous of those central districts can determine those who are indigenous of those central districts and give us a candidate on the platforms of political parties. It is good to recognize the fact that we have a vast majority of non-indigenous as Lagos residents, and there's no way we can stop the influx of people into Lagos. It's not possible, and therefore, the solution is to ensure that there is affirmative action as a matter of law. Let it be enshrined in the law. The Lagos Area Assembly can, or national, whatever body can establish it in the law books, that the governorship of Lagos, the deputy governorship of Lagos, the Speaker of the House of Assembly should be exclusively in the purview or the exclusive right of Lagos indigenes. The judicial arm can be left open depending on the circumstances. Anybody that is competent, that is fair, can be the Chief Judge of Lagos State. But in terms of the governorship, I personally will say that anybody whose ancestors could trace, whose parents or who could trace the ancestry, I'm talking of 5 generations now, not 2 generations, so 5 generations, 6 generations to Lagos, and who have not that place to live in Lagos, who can claim an origin in Lagos by virtue of the origin of their family in Lagos. I believe that such people should be given, I've written it on paper. If you want to read it, go and look at the lecture, which Lagos Whose History. It was published in Lagos News and Records, volume 24, 2019, pages 140 to 170. You can see. This is my own recommendation. I said it at the time when I gave that lecture that if we did not do this, very soon we are going to have the case of Red Indians. Red Indians were indigenous people in America, but they have become extinct, practically extinct in America now. Nobody reckons with them. So those who came now are now claiming to be indigenous of America and are oppressing them. We don't want to have a case of those people, Red Indians in America, the Aborigines in Australia. We don't want to have that in Lagos. And you know that Lagos is combustible. We don't want trouble. Anything that affects Lagos economy will affect the whole of Nigeria. And it is difficult to manage a crisis. It is better to prevent that kind of crisis. That's my own position. It's on paper. Anybody that wants to read it can engage with me. and then you can decide to write a rejoin. That's what I just said now.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Thank you, Prof. Thank you so much for that. And thank you, Tajudeen, for that question.
Yeah, thank you.
Larry,
Okay.
over to you.
Yes, ma'am. We have 2 more questions. GBK Odibanjo, please go ahead. Hello. Oh, I guess we'll move on to the next one then. Onayele Oreoluwa. Please go ahead.
That's my powerful DG.
Okay. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Can you? Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes,
finally.
sir.
Thank you,
I can hear you, sir.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes, I've been trying.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. First, I want to thank the DG for this innovation. One of the fallouts of this coronavirus is such webinar sessions and all that, and probably never come to existence without this COVID. So this is one of the positive fallouts of it. Now, I quickly want to just lend my voice to some of the things that have been said. First, Prof, I should say happy birthday to you now. I know your birthday is somewhere, I think about 3 or 4 days ago.
Yes, sir. June 9.
June 9, yes.
Yes.
You are the International Archives Day double celebration.
Right.
Now,
thank you, sir.
When people are talking about the history of Lagos, I am not too careful to say this. I am not too careful. That to say Lagos is a no man's land is, I think, is an insult, and that's the whole essence of establishing that star. However, for those of us who think that that Lagos is our Lagos, we have a lot to do ourselves. We cannot just sit down in the open of our rooms and think that that we can claim that Lagos is specific to us. First, the history of Lagos must come back. And I know that there was a time when Last Tribe was trying to sign an MOU with the history department of LASU, for spectacular thesis on Lagos to be brought to Last Tribe for preservation and public consultation. Maybe the DG wants to, we want to continue on that path and see, so we can actually increase our holdings on the history of Lagos. Someone mentioned, Prof, you mentioned that we should incorporate the teaching of history into the curriculum of our students in school. We went a step further, and I think in 2018, thereabout, if I'm right, we actually went and took students from primary schools, secondary schools in Lagos, and we took them around the historical sites in Lagos. I was supposed to do that again in 2018 or thereabout, but there was no funds, to do it. But we have started that process. Every Lagos Day, we called it Lagos Day celebration. We identify schools. We ask schools to bring pupils from that school, and one day we take them around specific historical sites where our staff give them the history of Lagos in that area. Maybe we want to continue that too if government makes the funds available. See, Last Tribe has so many things to do, but it's just the financial constraints that is holding us back. And I hope that now the present DG will be able to do more on that and work on that. My vision of what Last Tribe will be in another 2-3 years is such that I see Last Tribe as becoming one of the treasure groups in Lagos for determining what will happen to Lagos and to the people living in Lagos. The issue of special funds for Lagos, I think it lends to this, because you find that when you're talking about Lagos being for Lagosians, you find that there is no way we can stop other people from coming to Lagos because of the fact that we have so many amenities, so many things working for us here, which other states are not don't have. And of course, people will always migrate to where there is comfort and and there is a better living condition. And so that's why we have that. However, I feel that the teaching of history of Lagos should not be left to LASTRAB or to government alone. Even we in our own individual homes, we should teach our students, we should tell our children our history. We should let them know. People are shy now because of the religion, Christianity, and Islam and all that, and they're thinking that all these things are fetish and all that. But I don't think so. All names have histories behind them. That word Olukoju is not an abstract name. It has an history behind it, and that history will revolve around what was happening in that environment or in that family. And I think we should go back to that. We should try to start telling our children our history ourselves, and hope that it will continue. It will continue that way. And of course, the teaching of history should also be brought back to school. However, my only fear about that is, do we have enough historians, people who are actually depth in the history of Lagos to teach that subject in secondary school? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. It's really lovely to hear from you. Thanks for supporting us and for really creating a wonderful, platform that we are, developing on. Thank you so much. That's the former DG of LASTRAB that just shared some wonderful contributions. So I'll hand over to Prof. Prof, do you have anything to say?
Yes. First of all, let me thank my Oga at the top, Dr. Naile, for tuning in and taking part in this program. I'm sure you know a very powerful predecessor of yours who was really, really committed to marking the International Archives Day. Somewhere in this room behind me, I have plaques that LASTRAB gave each time the event coincided with my birthday. So I want to thank Dr. Naile for his love, his generosity, and his passion, the kind of passion that Dr. Usman had, which our new DG has demonstrated. I want to make two quick comments about his suggestion. Number one is the idea of a textbook for Lagos. I want this information. You can cross-check the veracity of it. I believe that it was way back in 2014 or 2015 that we completed a book, two books for Lagos State, history textbooks for use in junior secondary and upper primary schools. That allows her, but they've not been published. We have not had anything from the government. So that's one thing. We assembled a crop of competent historians, LASU, UNILAG, and other places. We produced those textbooks. We haven't heard anything from Lagos State since that time. The other point I want to make, which is rather controversial, is that I align with Dr. Nayele's suggestion. If Lagos cannot stop people coming in, and Lagos is an open space for people to come in, my worry is that many governors of many states in Nigeria do not care about their citizens. They allow them to migrate anywhere. And my suggestion has been, is it possible to know who comes from which state in Nigeria and to ask those states to subsidize the budget of Lagos State? It's controversial, but I think it's something that is considering. Because Lagos is subsidizing many states in Nigeria, and it is doing so willy-nilly because there's no way Lagos can peg the number of people coming to Lagos. So the idea of a special fund for Lagos, either by asking those governments to chip in, or the federal government to give Lagos something, is something that is worth considering. Otherwise, those state governments should allow Lagos to deport, to sugar back its citizens, their citizens back to them. I know that we can't do that in Nigeria, but the point I'm trying to make is, let Lagos get something for bearing the burden of Nigeria, something extra to whatever it is getting now. Then, in terms of Lagos history, I want to make 3 suggestions now. The first suggestion is that we should be looking at private archives in Lagos. I think that LASTRAB should go all out to harvest as many private archives, and there are many of them. A few years ago, I went to a place at Oshodi, somewhere at Oshodi there. And I ran into one old politician, a politician of the 1960s. The question I'm asking myself is, what happens to that man's private papers? Was an action group, maybe council or something? What happens to his papers? There are people in Lagos here, on the island, or the mainland, to Ikorodu, Badagry. Look at someone like Mudeni and all that. Look at this gentleman that just passed on. How do we get their private papers, particularly in papers relating to governance, public policy in Lagos? That's my number one question. The second question is, how do we get newspapers published in Lagos? The Kwakete of Lagos, another elite of it. How do we get them? I was reading a book. I was asked to review a book for a journal in Canada. And this woman read all these Lagos newspapers, so many of them. The question is, where did she read them? Certainly not in Lagos. So I want LASTRA to look anywhere they can to get these papers. I was looking for a newspaper, the Nigerian Advocate, published in Lagos. It was published, I think, in the 1920s. I was looking for a particular issue of 1924. They couldn't get it for me from the UK. But I was surprised to discover that it's there at Ibadan, the National Archives Library. Such newspapers should be in the LASTRA repository here. And the other point I want to make is that anybody that has written a thesis on Lagos, either that the person should be asked to make a copy available, or LASTRA should photocopy it. Every thesis on Lagos should be in the LASTRA library. And every year we can be updating the list of those theses from different universities, not only in Nigeria here, but abroad. Those are my suggestions as to what you can do. And as for Macaulay papers at UL, you can go and photocopy them. About Macaulay papers, Henry Carr papers, let's bring them to a central place in Lagos, LASTRA, where people can access them. They can be not just in book form, now they can be in PDF format, they can be in soft copy so that people can access it from a distance. And from that point, LASTRA can even make some money for itself.
Thank you so much, Prof. That's a wonderful idea, and we'll definitely follow up. I was just told now that SSG, the Secretary to the State Government, Mrs. Jaji, wants to share something with us. So I would like to please ask Larry to add her to the conversation at this point. Thank you.
Prof, you are doing a fantastic job. We are enjoying you. God will give you long life, sir.
And you too, sir.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a comment here that LASTRA has Macaulay papers.
Okay. I think Mr. Jaji is on now. Oh, good afternoon, ma. You're welcome to the show, ma. Thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome, ma.
It's a pleasure
to have you, ma.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be on the webinar. Let me first of all congratulate the Prof for a very good lecture, which unfortunately I was not privileged to listen to from the beginning. I just joined. And I also want to congratulate my dear daughter, Mrs. Bilkis Abiola.
Thank you, ma.
A good job she's doing, because a lot of people would see the LASRAP, that agency, as a dead end. But I'm happy that she's taking advantage of the new normal that we have now, you know, where we can still do a lot of things despite the COVID-19, you know, pandemic that we have. So really, I'm happy for you, and I want to believe that that agency will continue to move in leaps and bounds. And I also want to thank the former DG, Mr. Onoyele, for also being part of the program. Professor, thank you very much.
Thanks, ma'am.
So I wish you all the best.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you. This is a wonderful vote of confidence coming from you. We're very happy that you joined us. Thank you so much. We are encouraged.
Thank you very much, ma. Dr. Husseini is greeting you, ma. Thank you.
Ah, okay, my dear brother.
Yes, ma.
Hey, FSD, ma, I'm here.
My dear PS, God bless you. For being there.
SSG, ma, coconut is here.
GM, thank
Yes,
you.
ma.
Yes, it's a wonderful thing. I'm happy, we're all together in it. And by God's grace, we will continue to excel as Lagos State is the center of excellence. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. That was the SSG. Thank you so much, ma'am. I'm very grateful.
Thanks, ma'am.
So I think, Prof, we could be here for forever. But, I want to just ask you one last question. I promise. This is the last question.
No problem. I'm at home, actually.
You mentioned that, and I think that's one of the things that Lagos, I think when we were talking, we mentioned how Lagos was initially it was not even part of Nigeria. It was added after the fact. And I know you said it was controversial, but I wanted to just kind of draw something out that you mentioned. You had spoken about how, and this is a fact, that a lot of states, I think we only have about 5 or 6 states that are actually viable. A lot of states are not able to meet up with their obligations.
That's right.
And because people are looking for opportunities, they have to go all over, and they come to Lagos because Lagos is known as the land of opportunity. And like you mentioned, sir, you mentioned that, that because of that, Lagos is carrying a very big burden on itself because it has to take care of everybody. And because it's a subnational, it doesn't have the luxury, or because we're all Nigerian. At the end of the day, we're all Nigerians. There's no ability to say, okay, you're not from Nigeria, you're not from Lagos country, so you cannot be in Lagos because the person is a Nigerian. But in other countries, like nation states like Singapore, I think that's one of the things that Singapore had, is that they were able to control that. So in Lagos, how do you think we can handle this issue of being a subnational, but also in a way being a country? We're almost like a country. You mentioned that we are the top. If we are a country, we would have the top 5 GDP in sub-Saharan Africa. So how do you think that has played a role?
Well, there's a popular Yoruba saying, which I cannot mention online now, that somebody put salt in my mouth and then added something. You cannot swallow the salt, but I think I cannot spit it out. For those who understand Yoruba language, you understand what I'm talking about. So Lagos has been made substantially by external factors of trade, external factor of colonialism, external factor of people coming in with enterprise, with capital and all that, which is very true. So Lagos cannot have the best of both worlds. It has to manage the assets and the liabilities, as it were. I think the way forward for Lagos, and I think this is a very serious matter, is for Lagos to see itself in a regional setting. In other words, for Lagos to survive into the 22nd century, there has to be a harmonious working relationship with Ogun State, for example, and beyond Ogun State. And that is to say that in terms of alignment of policies, alignment of transport infrastructure, Lagos has to align with Ogun State, such that the population of Lagos can be, as it were, exported to Ogun State, or even exported to Oyo State, so that Lagos is not overburdened with issues of housing, waste collection, and all that. Because as in the case, I lived in Tokyo, for example, as in the case of Tokyo, the government deliberately created a port somewhere far away at Kashima so that people could move from Tokyo metropolis to Kashima. And it happened. The population of Tokyo was emptied into Kashima. Kashima started from zero, and within a decade, it became a major port. So maybe Lagos, and that, when I say Lagos, it's not just Lagos acting alone. Lagos and the federal government, to look at the issue of Lagos as a regional problem, as also a national problem. And therefore, it must have a regional solution and a national solution. Ogun State and Lagos State, in fact, if you look at a place like Bega, you begin to wonder. I've always suggested that why not just extend the boundary of Lagos to the Ogun River so that any community, any territory beyond that river can be in Lagos State. That, I think, might be a temporary solution because in terms of governance, in terms of municipal governance, sometimes you don't know that you have already crossed from Lagos to Ogun and vice versa, even as far as places like Odogunyan in Ikorodu. So I think that maybe some boundary adjustments to be made. That will be difficult, of course, but the easier one is for Lagos and Ogun to harmonize their infrastructure policies, tax policies, housing development policies, and so on and so forth, so that people who ordinarily will have lived in Lagos can live in Shagamu, can even live in Ibadan and commute to Lagos by rail. 1 hour, you are there. That's what happens elsewhere. I mean, that was how I lived my life in Japan. I was commuting from somewhere, Chiba Prefecture, from outside the metropolis. So the future of Lagos is not entirely in the hands of Lagos. The future of Lagos is in the hands of the Nigerian polity, the Nigerian political economy, and in the hands of the contiguous states. And therefore, Lagos should have a working relationship, a synergy with Ogun State. Lagos should properly embed itself with what is called the DAWN, Development Agency of Western Nigeria, so that Lagos will prosper more, not by becoming an island, but by opening up and becoming the hub, the mother to a wider hinterland. And that has always been, and that will always be the destiny of Lagos. Lagos not in isolation, but Lagos harvesting the best that it could from the hinterland and giving back to it, because Lagos has always been giving, but Lagos has also always been receiving from the hinterland. So it's a symbiotic relationship which has to be managed, not just on terms of Lagos, but on the terms of all the partners and the elements working together to make Lagos what it is.
Wow, very powerful, sir. Very, very powerful. We have one more person that has been trying to ask a question. I think she has some technical difficulties. Please, I'll just call on her to quickly ask a question before we wrap up the webinar. Thank you so much.
Yes. Hello, Mrs. Onibadro. Can you hear us? I think she's still having some technical issues. So I think
she could type it.
I would suggest that to her right away.
Can she type it? Okay.
Someone else has raised their hand.
She's on mute and she doesn't know she's on mute.
She's on mute, yes, maybe.
Unmute yourself,
I think that's what it's...
Okay.
Hello, Ma. Can you unmute yourself if you can hear us? No, I don't think. Maybe the connection is bad. But we do have someone else, Onikekbo Olushola. Maybe we can just try. That would work.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon.
Okay, yes, good afternoon. Onikekbo, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, that's fine. Onikekbo is my name, like you rightly mentioned. I was a former staff of LASRAB, a pioneer staff of the Bureau. LASRAB has always been, of great interest to me. Anytime I hear news on LASRAB, it's like it's still a part of me because it's the organization that groomed me even up until where I am right now. My question so far is on the collections we have at LASRAB. I know there are great collections in the repository. If you notice, post-COVID has brought a lot of changes in work environment at the moment. Has LASTRA been able to get like a system or what is it called? Yeah, a digital system by which they can what is it called? They can digitize all their collections. Because at the moment right now, the new normal is I don't have to go to LASTRA to get an information if I want it. I should be able to speak to LASTRA via maybe their website or whatever portal that they have created for the public. I should be able to do that, get an information from them online. I don't have to physically be there. What are LASTRA's plan? Yes, I know sometimes the bureau is constrained. Yes, like the former DJ said, Mr. Onayeli, that LASTRA has always been financially constrained. That has been the major challenge of the bureau since inception. I think the new DG, I think there needs to be a great improvement on that end. I think there need to be a great work done on that end financially, because now people don't have to go to LASTRA to get information. I think it's best for the bureau to get a system that can automate all the collections, because there could be a fire disaster, there could be flooding, there could be something, you know, that can just, you know, mess up that place and all the collections we have gathered over the years, because I was part of the team that, you know, collected, you know, a great collection from so many people. And I remember hearing here that Mr. Lawal was saying they got some collections from UK. Those are valuable collections. Those are archives that needs to be preserved, not only hard copies, but digitally, so that people can have access to them. Yes, you can create controls, you can create access, but maybe people can pay for it. You know, that's one of the ways to generate funds for the bureau. Remember we used to do that then. We used to, when we were running the photocopying area, I can't remember, reprography, we used to charge people for making copies of our collections. Those are little ways then I know the DG used to look out for how we can generate some funds for the bureau. I pray, you know, that the bureau moves forward more than where it is presently. And I pray that God will grant you more wisdom. And Professor, thank you for your time. Thank you for the lecture. So it's been very wonderful hearing from you again. I'm also a former student of history and international studies. Thank you very much, sir, and it's good seeing you here once again. And lastly, I would like to say, I think there's need also for more training, maybe staff training. The world is a changed environment now. It's a changed environment now. For instance, where I work, I'm working from home. I've been working from home in the last 3 months. I don't have to go to work. So I think staff training also can help improve the staff morale. I think the staff morale there is a bit low at LASTRA. I believe and I trust that there's great future in LASTRA. I believe there's great future in LASTRA. Like I said, it's the bureau that has shaped me into what I am today. I look at my work experience over the years, and I always remember LASTRA, right from the late DG, Mr. Uthman, and Mr. Onayeli, the BS, who later became the DG of the place. I wish LASTRA well. I wish the DG and her team well in the future endeavors, and Lagos also. I wish Lagos also well. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your contributions. We definitely are working on something on digitalization of LASTRA, and there are plans already in place for that. So we are very, hopeful that it will happen very soon. And hopefully very soon, the LASTRA collections that you mentioned will be available online. And we're also working aggressively to also collect more collections, because we know that there are still a lot of things out there that we need to collect, like the Prof mentioned, that we need to add to our collections. People come to LASTRA from all over the world to come and look at what we have. So we know that we are playing a very important role in managing Lagos State's heritage, and we're going to continue to do our best. So thank you so much. On that note, I'm going to call on Dr. Oseni to give us a vote of thanks. It was a fantastic webinar. We all learned so much. Prof, in fact, you have been wonderful. You have been amazing. And, I have pages and pages of notes here that have really opened my eyes to Lagos State, because there's so many things that I wasn't even aware of, and I know a lot of our listeners have learned a lot today. So on that note, thank you so much. So I'll let Dr. Kolawole Oseni give us a quick vote of thanks to Professor Olukoju. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my DG. It's been a very wonderful day, and it's looking at the number of people and the caliber of people that come today, it shows that this is a very noble program, and I know it's a great vision that will last, will be sustainable. Prof, I cannot but thank God on your behalf. You have always made us proud. Like my former DG said, we used to sing happy birthday to you anytime we are doing archive, International Archive Day. And this program is also marking, it's one of the ways by which we are marking, Archive Day, in NASTRAP. So we want to really thank you for being part of us, for being consistent, for being committed, for being just, I don't know what to say, just to say thank you very much. God will continue to strengthen your strength. God will give you a long life. And I pray finally that God will go to, you are on the top already. You will soon become the topic. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much. I salute you. Thank you very much, Ma. And thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Big privilege and grateful. I hope we see someday.
By God's grace.
Yes, and I also want to thank the SSG, for coming. We cannot but notice your presence. It has also made this very historical. And it's going to go a long way to help us, for all other programs, in LASTRAP. I'm thanking my DG for this vision. And also I want to thank all the members of staff, everybody who are there silent, enjoying it. I thought maybe one of them will ask one or two questions, but I can see many of them are present to grace this occasion. We appreciate you. There's nothing DG can do without us supporting her. So we thank all of you also for coming. The BS, we thank you also for being part of this program, the Bureau Secretary. Our indefatigable Bureau Secretary, we also thank you. Lastly, DG, over to you.
Thank you. I also want to join you in thanking our SSG. I also want to thank the Permanent Secretary for the Ministry of Wealth Creation, Mrs. Bola Dale Thomas. Thank you so much, Ma. You were one of the first people to join the call, and you were there throughout. Bola Dele Thomas. Thank you so much, Ma. You were at the beginning, and you were there throughout, listening, contributing. We cannot but, thank you and be grateful to you for all your contributions. I want to thank the General Manager for the LASCODA, my brother in Coconut. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you to my predecessor, the former Director General of LASTRAP. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you. Thanks to every other person, to Mr. Bashir Are, to Dr. Lawal, to all the people that asked questions, to all the people that listened. We are grateful to each and every one of you. Thank you for joining us. We have spent 2 hours here today, and I know we are all leaving this program with a wonderful wealth of experience and knowledge. Thank you so much, and God bless everyone.
Thank you, Mom.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mom.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.